service, and advocacy. Zonta International has more than 28,000 members and 1,200 Zonta clubs across 61 countries, all of us working together to improve the legal, educational, health, and professional status of women and girls. Zonta does stand for women's rights, and we advocate for equality, education, and an end to child marriage and gender-based violence. Zonta expands opportunities for women and girls through our international education programs and service projects. We're very proud to have been doing this for over 100 years. Our work commenced when a small group of pioneering women came together in Buffalo, New York, with a vision to help realize greater equality while using their individual and collective expertise in service to their community. We really do believe in making the world a better place by empowering women. We find joy in doing this in a supportive community of like-minded professionals from diverse countries and cultures. At this moment, I would particularly like to recognize our fellow Zontans from the Ukraine. We know that in times of conflict and war, women primarily bear the burden of keeping their families together, ensuring the safety and health of their children, and addressing the long-term emotional and physical damage inflicted by war. One of the Zonta International objectives is to work for the advancement of understanding, goodwill, and peace through World Fellowship of Members. We will continue to build and support a global community of individuals who share a common commitment to equality and peace for all. Now, today, our club meeting will commemorate International Women's Day, which is celebrated on the 8th of March every year. The purpose of this day is to forge a gender-equal world. The theme of this year's International Women's Day is to break the bias. It's a theme and mission that Zonta International is wholly aligned with. We celebrate women's achievements and we raise awareness against bias. We take action for equality. And on that note, if I may interject a brief update, I'm very pleased to share what's happening for our club recipient of the Achievement Award for Young Indigenous Women. Madison Kennedy, who was the recipient of this award last year, has just let us know that she has achieved an ATAR rating of 86.95 and was on the merit list for community and family studies. We are incredibly proud of her, and I'm so pleased to share that update with all of you. Now it's my pleasure to open today's meeting with the induction of 2 new club members to Zonta. I will be joined by Mary Jane, our club membership chair, but first I will introduce our inductees and take them through our induction process and our pledge. First, I will introduce Stephanie Rodriguez. Thank you for the slide, Maria. Stephanie is a serial entrepreneur, an international citizen, a leading digital futurist, and an award-winning digital, mobile, and social media strategist and speaker. On a mission to impact 1 billion lives by 2025 and democratize safety, Stephanie is the founder and CEO of a startup, Jozu for Women Incorporated, creative designer of the Wonder Safe digital application, and the inventor of the international award-winning Shakti and Beacon nonviolent personal safety systems. Her subject matter expertise on personal safety and global risk is second to none as a member of the US Department of State's OSAC.gov Women in Security Council. In 2016, her career pivoted when a series of events inspired her to focus energy and efforts on working on global solutions in support of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Since then, she has raised more than $2 million in funding and research and development for her application WonderSafe. Stephanie is also world-renowned as the malaria miracle, as she survived cerebral malaria and severe septic shock in September 2019. And that had her hospitalized for more than 380 days on 2 continents. Since February 2020, Stephanie has undergone more than 37 operations, and That has made her Australia's first female bilateral osseointegrated bionic below-the-knee amputee. Her incredible journey was featured last year on the Good Weekend magazine. On the 10th of March, she will be doing her first TED Talk in South Africa, and her book, Thank You, Mrs. Carter, will be published this year. Welcome, Stephanie, and I will now turn to Vanessa Song, known as Ness. Ness will be joining our club, joining our club as a young professional member. She is the founder of Empower Australia, a youth mentoring organization dedicated to matching young people aged 17 to 27 up with mentors who align their values and goals with their values and goals. Empower teach everything from job readiness to financial literacy and effective goal setting. Ness started Empower in January of 2020 after realizing all the gaps in knowledge and skills she had in key areas that were crucial to her success. It was only after failure that she was able to see these gaps clearly, and from that point forward, she committed to do what needed to be done to ensure the other young people didn't have to learn the hard lessons that she learned. In the ways she had to learn them in order to better understand their valuable contributions and how they can serve their communities. Ness is half Chinese and half Chilean, so proficient in both Spanish and Mandarin. As a small business owner, she is self-taught web developer, social media coordinator, and events planner extraordinaire. She prides herself in her ability to learn very quickly with anything she puts her mind to. Now I'll share a little bit more about Zonta as we transition into this induction process. We are honored that both of you would like to join the Zonta Club of Sydney Breakfast to empower women worldwide through service and advocacy. You are joining a progressive global organization whose voice is heard and respected locally, nationally, and internationally. Zonta has consultative status with the United Nations and participatory status with the Council of Europe. Now, the name Zonta is derived from a Lakota word of the Native American Sioux peoples, meaning honest and trustworthy. Now, our members volunteer their time and talents to work towards Zonta's vision. And Zonta envisions a world in which women's rights are recognized as human rights, and every woman is able to achieve her full potential. In such a world, every woman has access to all resources and is represented in decision-making positions on an equal basis with men. In such a world, no woman lives in fear of violence. So to achieve this vision, Zontans will take the following actions. They support and participate in club, area, and district Zonta service and advocacy projects that make a difference in the lives of women and girls. They advocate Zonta's position on issues to safeguard the rights of women and girls as human rights. They support Zonta Foundation for Women projects. They collaborate with like-minded organizations, government, and community leaders who share common goals. They encourage the development in leadership and mentorship skills of their members to be at their best. And they're united internationally to provide support and fellowship in serving our communities, nations, and the world. So we invite all of our club members to enact high ethical standards and to be positive role models, embrace personal growth and Zonta leadership roles, work cooperatively and respectively with other members. Zonta International is classified worldwide as a worldwide service organization of members committed to diversity of membership, and we value fellowship of members from all professions and cultures. Membership in Zonta is an honor and a privilege, and that comes with some responsibilities, such as participation in our service projects and support for our international programs. If called upon for leadership responsibilities, you are encouraged to serve. Zonta is strongly committed to the ideal of equality for all as expressed in the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And we are confident that you will contribute your care, enthusiasm, and talents to our club. Now, Stephanie and Ness, if you could please unmute yourselves momentarily, I will ask you to repeat this Zonta pledge after me. The words are, I pledge myself to uphold and practice the ideals of Zonta. Over to you.
I pledge myself to uphold the values
and practice the ideals of Zonta.
And practice the ideals of Zonta.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Ness? Oh, if you could just unmute yourself. And the words are, I pledge myself to uphold and practice the ideals of Zonta.
I pledge myself to uphold and practice the ideals of Zonta.
Thank you so much, both of you. Now, members of the Zonta Club of Sydney Breakfast, if you can now please unmute yourselves. I will now ask you all a question, and the affirmative response is we do. Do you receive Stephanie and Ness as members of this club and promise to work with them to further the ideals of Zonta International?
I do.
We do.
Do.
Stephanie and Ness, the Fellowship of Zonta welcomes you, and our club members look forward to working with you to create a world where Zonta's vision is a reality. A warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm honored.
And we're honored to have you. Thank you. If I may now, thank you. If I may now hand over to our membership chair, Dr. Mary Jane Mahoney. She's going to share a little bit about the Zonta badge. Over to you, Mary Jane.
Okay, thank you, Tamara. Yes, on the slide which was used to introduce each of you, there was a picture of the badge, and there was also a yellow rose. And I'm going to first just mention the yellow rose, the Zonta rose, which is a symbol of friendship and other things within Zonta. So you'll often see yellow roses as you travel through the Zonta world. You'll each receive a membership badge. Stephanie, yours will go into the post by tomorrow, so you'll have it to take with you to South Africa.
I will wear it proudly.
Yes, and Ness, yours is, I think you will understand, it will be in process for a little while. We'll also be sending each of you by email and or in the post some information about Zonta that you hopefully is digestible, not too much and not too little. But I did want to speak about the badge. Now that we are meeting so often virtually, the badge that those of us who've been in Zonta for a long time have worn with pride, we don't wear them very much. And so I thought it was important that we just reflect on why we have badges in Zonta. Yes, they're there to say that we are members, and we could wear them at meetings or among ourselves where we already know each other. And we can wear them when we go to other Zonta functions. And it shows that we are members of Zonta and not just visitors. But they are also play a very important role when we do the work of Zonta in service and advocacy, when we go out into our communities. Examples for service might be when we have a large event to put together birthing kits where we invite people from many places. So we want to show that we're members of Zonta and to prompt discussion. And even more important, perhaps, is when we undertake advocacy, when we go to visit our local members, or when we maybe give a TED talk. I think that's probably a step too far, Stephanie, so I'm not really saying that. But to wear the badge to say, yes, we are here speaking on behalf of the ideals of Zonta, and that is why we do have badges. And each new member receives a badge to wear when they are doing such work or when they are visiting any Zonta community. So thanks for that, and back to you, Temri.
It's now my pleasure to hand over to Olivia Sarah Lillashore, who will introduce our guest speaker. Thanks, Olivia.
Thank you so much, Temre. Temre, you mentioned at the start of the call our recognition for the situation that the women in the Ukraine are going through, and of course we do have Zonta clubs there. So it's quite fitting that I've got the opportunity to introduce Professor Shirley Randell, because she knows better than many what the impact of conflict is on women's lives. She is globally recognised as a leading expert in the public sector and institutional reform in developing countries, gender mainstreaming and human rights for women. But of course, she's very fondly known to us as a member of our club and an honorary member of Zonta International. And I'm so pleased that Shirley could join us this morning because she has just recently had some surgery. And I've got to say, Shirley, you look pretty glamorous for somebody who is just recovering from surgery. So thank you.
I have to show you this terrible ear, but you can't see it. I've covered it.
Well done, well done. So the reason I'm so pleased that Shirley can join us on this International Women's Day is I did have the privilege and the pleasure of attending Shirley's book launch quite recently. And for somebody who's been in our club for a long time and who we're very proud to call a member, I don't think we truly appreciate the tenacity and the patience that Shirley and her colleagues have shown in supporting social change in Rwanda through the introduction of their master's program in gender, culture and development. And I really thought it would be quite wonderful if Shirley could share those experiences with us. Some of you might have had the opportunity to have dipped into her book, which is available online. It's open source, so you can see it and read it. I think it's quite wonderful because it talks about the journey to establish the master's program, but also introduces you to each of the individual students who were accepted into that very first master's program. It shares their aspirations and their backgrounds. It's important, and I hadn't probably appreciated this until Shirley, I heard you speaking at the book launch around the impact of the genocide in 1994 and the impact it had on women because of the absence of men through death or through being jailed or otherwise being unavailable, and the impact that the legal framework had on women's ability to act in positions in public life. And so I'm quite pleased that you can join us this morning and share your story and so that we can get to know you a little bit better than we already do. So everyone, I'd like to formally introduce Professor Shirley Randell, and Shirley, it's now over to you.
Thanks very much, Olivia. Well, Maria and I have got a bit of a joint session this morning. So Maria is going to put on this presentation. And I'm going to talk about the work in Rwanda, which Olivia has referred to, but also, of course, International Women's Day, which is such a fantastic opportunity for women around the world to break those bonds that have been holding us back. And certainly that happened in Rwanda. I just wanted to show you where Rwanda is, because some of you may not be aware that it's actually a landlocked country right in the middle of East Africa, East and Central Africa, and just south of the equator. And the next slide shows you a bit about how it's surrounded by other countries. We have Congo and Uganda and Tanzania and Burundi and Kenya, all really very attaching themselves very closely to Rwanda. Everything comes through Kenya and some from Uganda. And I wanted then to show you Maria, I'll have to ask you to be a bit quick. In this case study, the policy changes that led to the legislative and social changes in the position of women in Rwanda. And that paved the way for the establishment of our centre at the University of Rwanda. And the graduates of the program, who I'll talk about soon, internalised the concepts and the theories and operationalised them. And they transformed the proposed policy changes into programs with real effects. So I lived in Rwanda for 9 years, from 2006 to 2014. And I want to illustrate the changing roles of women following the genocide and give some examples of how extraordinary women graduates and leaders now undertaking roles not seen as women's place in the past. So by building capacity through learning and supporting mechanisms, we facilitated the inexperienced women to come into positions of leadership and gave them a voice in the political and policy implementation process. And every year we joyfully celebrated International Day in Rwanda, International Women's Day. Policy changes in Rwanda followed the genocide, and they led to legislative and social changes in the position of women in Rwanda. And this is just a slide of the French who were training the very illiterate farmers and workers using clubs and gardening sticks that they used, the machetes they provided as well, to kill and batter both men and women during the genocide. And over 1 million people were quite cruelly slaughtered in that way. This is from one of the genocide memorials. Over 300,000 women were raped, terribly raped, in the most shocking way in Rwanda. But after the genocide, Rwandan women initially made up over 70% of the population. And as mentioned earlier, men had either been killed or imprisoned or fled. So women's associations started activities, and ordinary women assumed leadership in those activities. There was quite extraordinary political will for gender equality and women's empowerment, and that came mostly from President Kagame. Women from both sides of the conflict, both Hutus and Tutsis, came together to reconstruct their society, to bring peace and the reconciliation process. The government policy initiatives were very strong, following women's participation in the political front struggle from 1990 to 94, both as leaders in the commission. 3 of the commission leaders were women, 3 out of 8, and women were also foot soldiers. One of my dear friends left her baby with her mother and participated in the front line when they were fighting the genocidaires. So the 2003 Constitution contained clauses which said that 25% of all decision-making positions were to be held by women. I think actually it's 30%. I might have made a mistake there. And a gender monitoring office was to be established to monitor progress towards gender equality. And those laws led to equal inheritance, which is the thing that holds women back in many countries, and particularly in Africa. And so women were able to have land and own it with their husbands, and they were instrumental in achieving the Millennium Development Goals, lifting 1 million people out of poverty. I'm reminding you now about the gender goals, the MDGs, because Rwanda was the country in Africa that actually achieved them, except for poverty. And this goal 1, that they actually brought 1 million people out of poverty, but they still had some people, women and men, who were under extreme poverty, but the other goals are achieved. And then the next slide shows you what we're looking for now, which is the Sustainable Development Goals. And Zonta, of course, has got 4 of those as major initiatives. I wanted then to show you one of the women who was very strongly associated with the Centre for Gender. She died, Aloysia Nyumba. She had a cancer in her throat, and she was one of the commissioners of the Rwandan political front, and she was the first minister for gender in 1994. As soon as the government got into office, she was put in as the first minister for gender, and she went back to that role in 2011 when I was working with her, and was the chair of the Unity and Reconciliation Commission. She came on then to be district governor and then senator, and it was very sad that she died. She could easily have been the next president. The next woman is a Hutu woman from the other side, and Judith and Aloysia used to come down to my centre every month and say, how are you going? What can we do? They were amazing. This is in front of the parliamentary building in Kigali. And you can see that people decided they would keep the records of the destruction to the buildings in Rwanda that occurred in those 3 months. This was a result of the promotion of women in the 2013 election, the first election I was there. You can see President Kagame with all these amazing women. And they were not in any way token women. They all had come up through the process of local government and district government and provincial government into their positions of national government in NGOs and in public service. So tremendous change in what had happened there, really breaking the barriers. Next slide. So the leadership was developed by learning in academic institutions, many of them, both within Rwanda and overseas. And women from overseas were called back into Rwanda and had done magnificent things. The first Minister for Agriculture was a woman. She had a PhD in agriculture from America, and she's now running agriculture for the whole of the continent. And the second one was also a PhD from America who came back to serve their country. And they created opportunities for women and girls through education and through mentorship. Thanks, Maria. So the centre was quite a significant initiative in supporting social change. And I wanted really to have a Master of Social Studies that women and men could do and hopefully go into the universities to teach. That was my main objective. I wanted women teaching in the universities. In fact, only one of them is doing that now. The others are all over the world and across Rwanda doing magnificent things. When we established the centre, it was one of the major centres. There was education, health, etc. But they've now all moved into the College of Education with the combined University of Rwanda. And that was really supported by Rwanda. I went around to all the diplomatic agencies, and AusAid was one that funded a communication program. The Embassy of South Africa helped us, but in particular Norway, they gave us scholarships for 25 students. So the goal of the centre was to be an internationally known centre of excellence to produce professionally qualified leaders in a high quality strategic and research environment engaged in policy development, multicultural exchange, and community service. Our students, we had over 200 applicants because we had those scholarships. We had 25 scholarships from Norway. And I wanted 25 students, but the university insisted I take 50. And I was confronted with 50 students and no staff. So fortunately, I had a very important international network of gender experts, and 3 of them came to help me in that first 6 weeks. But 42 students were offered places in the first cohort and 21 were given part scholarships. The quality of students was very high. I mentioned earlier that they weren't necessarily experienced in gender, but most of them were, because in Rwanda, every school had a gender minister, every college had a gender minister selected by the students. So they had already worked in gender areas, and if they're in the public service, they were probably in a gender unit. I'm going to talk about students soon. But they were doing such a lot of things. They were teaching, they were in public service. You can go on, Maria, because these first students graduated there in my garden. Actually, we had a bit of a celebration and some have gone off with their families, but they were just so proud of being the first master students in gender and development. And they had to study as well as run their families. So the graduates of the program internalised these concepts and theories that they learned, and they operationalised them, turning proposed policy changes into programs with real effects. These are 6 of the students on that first cohort. I saw a video 3 years ago when I attended a Pan-African gender conference, And she is now living in Cote d'Ivoire, and she is the senior gender specialist for the African Development Bank, working right across the continent. Then next we have Oda Gasinzigwa. When I first went to Rwanda, she was the chair of the National Council of Women. She became, while we were studying, the first chief gender monitor in the newly formed Gender Monitoring Office. Then she became a Minister for Gender and Family Promotion, and she's now working in East Africa as one of Rwanda's representatives in the community parliament there. On the left is Françoise. She was the president of the Centre for Gender CGS. I've got to remember what that is. I think it was the Council for Gender Studies. And the newly elected president was Jeanette. She was handing over. Jeanette on the right was the second acting director of the Centre for Gender Studies. So that's what CGS is. And the next one is Vivian. Vivian had HIV. She was quite sick when she was doing the exams. She had a bottle of water and was trying to eat a little while she did her examinations, but she was our top student, both in the exams and right through the course. And she went across to America. She had treatment, and she's since had a little girl. Oh, the little girl, when I last saw her in Washington, again about 4 years ago now, it was teenager. And she's the executive director of the Empowerment Foundation, an NPO, which is in the Democratic Republic of Congo, but more importantly is the owner, coach, trainer, and international speaker for Furaha, a transformational enterprise training, coaching, and consulting. She's on the social network, media network, almost every day. And she was a top student, won the first Shirley Randell award for being that in the first cohort. The next student is Shamsi. She was the only woman that we had from the community of Muslims. She was on the National Women's Muslim Council, the only woman on that council. She then went on to a Pan-African job, and she is now working as the senior program officer in Promundo, a wonderful NGO that works around the world. Her first job after her training was with the Rwandan Men's Resource Centre. We had 6 men studying with us, and one was from the Rwanda Men's Resources Centre, and it was quite remarkable. Can we go on to the next slide? When we started the centre, the head of the Public Service Commission was one of our students, and that is her there, Angelina Maganza. And she stood up after Professor Sharon introduced masculinities and femininities. And she said, well, look, I'm really sorry, Professor, but we don't have any feminists in Rwanda. And this quite small man who ran the Rwandan Men's Resource Centre at that time stood up and said, well, I am a feminist, and this is why I am a feminist. The other woman on the left there is, she ran a program to make sanitary pads out of banana shells, skins, and it was amazing. There's little factories all across Rwanda where women were making sanitary pads. And finally, I wanted to show you one of the men. No, I haven't. I've got Jane Umatoni. Jane is my outstanding woman who's teaching in the university, and she's just got a PhD program that she's doing, I think, in combination with Switzerland and the University of Rwanda, where she teaches. It's the final slide of the students that shows one of our men students. And he came to the centre with his wife. They both studied together. They had these 2 little children. The children are now, I think, almost out of high school. His wife, Ernestine, won a scholarship to Switzerland, and they paid for her and her children to be in Switzerland for those years. And Simon, who works in the most amazingly dangerous places in Africa, he goes every 2 months to be with the family. I think you'll remember, Olivia, that the governor, when she was speaking at the launch, mentioned that he said there are 3 important people in his lives. They were women, his mother, his wife, and his daughter. And he's just quite a remarkable man. He's now also studying for a doctorate in business studies. So they're the 6 students I want to talk about first. But then there are the ones that followed. And we had 3 students who all won the Shirley Randell Award for being the top students. And I want to talk about each of those, Dimitri, Celine, and Colette. So Dimitri is the first. I have just been reviewing her book. She's done a biography of her 3 months in Rwanda. Very few Tutsis lived to talk about their experience in Rwanda. And one of the terrible things in her book is that she spent a month in the morgue hiding between bodies in a morgue. How she survived, I just don't know. She constantly ridiculed for being Tutsi. And she is working again on a national program. She's a holder of 2 master's degrees. She works with the World Bank as well in Rwanda. The second one is Celine, who I first met in Switzerland, actually, where she was the ambassador and permanent representative of the United Nations for Rwanda. And she completed her master's degree, was a top student in 2013 to 15. And she is back in Rwanda. She was appointed to the cabinet as a minister for gender promotion. And in her ministerial position, she's making a great contribution to developing policies and changing laws still for programs to improve the status of women in Rwanda. And the third is Colette. Colette went to the program pregnant. She had a first baby in the first year. She had a second baby in the next year. When I went across to give her award, the children were there and they were going to primary school. Her husband was just amazing, really supportive man and very proud of his wife. And that made a huge difference to her getting her program and doing it well. She's now working with a UK program, Gender Effect, as the Gender Insight Manager. So there were 3 students from later cohorts. And then we have ongoing scholarships to sports students in the Centre for Gender. I won't go through this, but we are providing scholarships every year for at least every cohort, at least 2, and sometimes more than that, depending on donations that come to me and also to a new organisation that my friends have established in the US so that they can have interest-free, they can get tax deductions for loans. We can't do that in Australia. Australia is not really interested in Africa. It's, of course, Asia Pacific that it concentrates on. So the next slide is really our conclusion, and I've left plenty of time so we can have questions, but it shows the link between policy, between education and policy implementation, by the ongoing work of postgraduates. And not only that, but the work of Zonta International, because Zonta's been there. One of its major programs was eliminating mother-to-child transmission of HIV, and that's been a remarkable success. I think right across Rwanda now, you don't have mother-to-child transition at all. And then they established a gender centre where people could come in, and some in the police stations, but theirs was a bit separate, and they can see a psychiatrist, they can see a doctor, they can stay there in the centres with their children while they find satisfactory accommodation. And that's another wonderful contribution that Zonta has made in Rwanda. The president's wife, Kagame's wife, Jeanette Kagame, was one of the Zonta International Honorary Fellows. So these stories for change in women and men that I've illustrated very quickly show the link that may be applicable for you and inspire you in your journey onward with education research. Great to hear that your new member is off to South Africa. a country that really needs continuing work in gender. But it does show how universities are uniquely positioned to share a truly global perspective on what gender equality leadership looks like as we all move forward into the new decade and beyond, and take up the International Women's Day's emphasis on breaking the bonds. The publication that Olivia referred to is called Gender and Learning in Rwanda, and it reflects our experience. Hilary Yerbury came to work for me for 10 weeks only in that first year, but she was a remarkable contributor, and she's a stunning collaborator. She works at the University of Technology, Sydney, and our experience is documented by UTS. That is the link, DOI org 105130 AAG. And if you haven't already done so, you can get onto that link. You can actually read the book online. You can print it out as PDFs, or you can buy a book. It was first of all available in Amazon overseas, but it now is available in Booktopia in Australia. And that is my email address if people want to contact me, and also my webpage. So that's been very quick, Maria. Thank you for helping me with that. And I'm very happy for any discussion, Olivia, to answer questions or elaborate on any of the slides.
Thank you, Shirley. Thank you for sharing those beautiful insights into some of the people that you have personally impacted in terms of changing their lives so that they can change the lives of many, many others. As I said when I introduced you, we get the opportunity to spend time with you regularly, but it's very special to be able to really be involved in this story of your time in Rwanda. And I'm sure that there are lots of questions. I wonder if I might kick off with one question. I was quite interested in your comment about the gender ministers in schools being selected by the students. And I love the idea that this concept around equality is starting at a grassroots level at a young age. I wonder if you might just be able to talk briefly about that and how the students are empowered to select somebody to be that gender minister.
Well, that's amazing, Olivia, and it happens at secondary level too, perhaps more importantly at secondary level, that the universities and teachers' colleges, which is now the university, select somebody to be, and they vote on it, vote on their gender minister, and they continue her in that role if she's competent. One of our first students was, I didn't show her, but she also worked for the UK when she graduated, for the UK funded program that impacts on women and girls right across the country, because they develop a magazine that is focusing on students' experiences, particularly teenagers' experiences on gender discrimination and gender equality. So it is a voting process, and it happens everywhere, because Kagame insisted that every public service department should have a minister for gender within their structure. I took a while to understand that somebody could be a minister for gender in a high school and then in a teacher's college and in public sector departments, but that's part of the transformation. And it's why we have still 65%, I think, of the parliamentarians in Rwanda are women this year, because they've come through that. You know, you read some critical stories from some US scholars who haven't even visited Rwanda and talk about these women as being token women. None of them that I knew were token women. They'd all come up through the structures, because the second woman that I showed you, Order, who's now working in Eastern Africa Parliament, she started off as the gender president of a gender society at village level. And then she went up to the provincial level. And when I met her, she was president of the National Women's Council. So that women have these opportunities right through to be president of village women's councils, and they get the experience of managing delivering change, working on policy as well as programs. So it's quite a magnificent way of getting women involved. And then, of course, because they've been involved at provincial level and in their communities, they get voted in as suitable representatives.
Wonderful system. Now, who else has got questions or comments? Oh, Temre, over to you.
Sure. Good morning, Shirley. Temre here. Congratulations on the success of your students and your book. You said at the end there, you hope that it inspired our work, and it certainly will. And my question is actually somewhat related to my work. And I'd love to get your thoughts on this. You know, I want to know what I guess what advice you have if you want to create real social change in the world. If you want to create a real movement, you know, all the way down to hearing how women from both sides of the conflict, from the Tutsi and the Hutus, coming together to make change and to come to this incredible position with the Center for Gender and Culture Diversity at the university. So what are your thoughts on how to create real social change?
Well, it comes from the people themselves rather than from any outsiders, I think. And when Kagame came into power in 1994, he put out this call to Rwandans overseas, and Rwandans had been, they'd gone overseas, first of all, in refugee camps. A lot of our students had come from Uganda refugee camps, or Kenya, or Tanzania, or Congo, but others had gone to France, and they had gone to the US, they'd gone to the UK, and they'd studied and right up to PhD level. And he said, we want you to come back and help your country. And they did. 2 women in particular were amazing. They came from US, and they decided that the only way they could get change was to work in the villages with Hutu and Tutsi women. And it was quite remarkable because sometimes these women were working with people who had killed their husbands and their children and their fathers. And, you know, it was just devastating. A couple of my students had lost 90 to 100 relatives in the genocide. Most of those first students were, in fact, Tutsis. We had some Hutus as well, but the majority of them were Tutsis, and they'd gone through unbelievable challenges in their lives. But these 2 women created a movement at village level of having Hutu and Tutsi women sitting down together in the villages and making baskets, weaving, using their traditional skills and weaving. And when I go to New York, which I used to do every year when we were able to travel to the International Women's Year and UN conference on women and change, I go to Macy's and see these magnificent baskets on the shelves of Macy's for phenomenal prices, but they've got a real network now of exports, etc. This starts and continues at village level with both Hutus and Tutsi women working together. One woman, and she had 98, Angelina, she was there, the public service commissioner. 98 of her relatives were killed. And I said to Angelina, how on earth can you forget and forgive what happened? And she said, well, Shirley, we can never forget. We will always remember, but we have to forgive. Unless we forgive and go on living in that state of forgiveness, we would all not be able to do our work at all. We'd be filled with the most shocking hatred, and it would just be too much. But she said, we do forgive, but we will never forget. I can never forget my mother, my father, my sisters, my brothers, my aunties, my uncles, nephews and nieces, all killed in some of the most brutal ways. And she was in that Hotel Rwanda. Some of you might have seen the film Hotel Rwanda. That was a bit of a shocking thing, because the man that they portrayed there was not as he appears to be. He's been raising money for children, orphans in Rwanda, and not a cent has come for the orphans, but a lot of money's gone into trying to destroy the government. he's now in jail in Rwanda, and hopefully will be convicted and will stay in jail. But they don't kill these people now, which they used to, and the UN would never let people go back to Rwanda to be tried. But now, of course, they do go back and they're tried and they're imprisoned in Rwanda if they find some of these genocidaires that are still being protected in France, in England, in the US. We don't have many in Rwanda, although we did have some that came in from US on extraordinary refugee status. Now, did I answer your question, Temre? I think it was the people themselves that took the initiatives and not the expatriates. I mean, I was there as an expatriate and I had the network to bring people there, but we now have Rwandans heading the centre and teaching in the centre. And one of our first women was from Tanzania, a professor from Tanzania. Another one, lecturer, came from South Africa. She had been imprisoned at the same time as Mandela had been imprisoned. And she was in the first parliament with Mandela and had undergone shocking treatment as a prisoner in South Africa. So she spoke about justice and transitional justice to the students. So gradually we've been able to bring in all African teachers, and they are so much better than the ones that we had, even though they were experts from overseas.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Shirley.
Does anybody else have any questions? Oh, Mary Jane.
Shirley, I'd like to ask a more sort of slightly personal question in that, how did you get to Rwanda? What took you to that role?
Okay, well, I was actually sacked from my role in Australia. I was running a city. It was one of the extraordinary cities that Jeff Kennett was able to put together after Joan Kerner was so roundly defeated, and he had a majority in both houses in Victoria. And they had 70 cities instead of 270, and brought in people who could manage change. And I was recruited as somebody who'd managed change in education at the College of Adult Education and at the University of Ballarat. And I lasted a year. 50 of us left after a year. Some of us were sacked. Some of us moved on because we couldn't bear it. We had to reduce the carrots that Kennett gave the community when he sacked all of the elected community leaders, was that we would reduce the rates by 20%. Well, the only way you can reduce rates is really by sacking staff, because most of your money in any organisation goes to staff. And we had these, in my case, I think it was 12 elected commissioners from Box Hill and 15 elected commissioners from Nunawading who were in the community and constantly looking at what we were doing and criticising what we were doing. It was a very challenging year. And my commissioners told me that they didn't really want me for another year. And I had worked as a young woman. My husband and I and our 4 children went to Papua New Guinea, and we volunteered there for 9 years with the church, opening a teachers' college. And as one of my colleagues said, look, we've got a job in Papua New Guinea. We're looking for reforming TAFE. And it wasn't Papua New Guinea, actually. It was Sri Lanka, that first one I went to, the Asian Development Bank, for 3 months. And of course, if you get into development work and you do a good job, you become well known. And I discovered that this work that I had done in many countries, whenever I got there with a team, they'd say, I'd be the only woman, and they'd say, well, Shirley will do women and migrants and disabilities. And I was writing reports that were being published around the world, and I didn't realise I was actually on a gender expert list in UK. And Kenya, the Rwandan vacancy came up, and the Dutch Development Agency contacted me just as I was finishing a job in Bangladesh on on gender mainstreaming in the public service, and said, would I go to Rwanda? So, and could I speak French? Well, I'd done a bit of French in Vanuatu and also in YWCA, but I really wasn't a French speaker. So they sent me for 2 weeks to France to learn French again, brush it up, sent me to Rwanda, where I didn't have to speak French at all because these people that were running the country at that stage were all English speakers who'd come in from overseas. So that was how I got there, starting as a senior gender officer for the Dutch Development Agency. And then after 3 years, they said they couldn't employ me anymore. I think I was 67 or something like that. And they said, we can't insure you. And I was about to leave Rwanda when the parliamentarians said to me, we'd like you to stay and we want you to start a Centre for Gender in the Parliament. I'd worked with the parliamentarians for a big international conference they had. I'd written a book that Aloisa, that first woman I showed you, said was her second Bible. She carried it everywhere. We, with another colleague from Rwanda, we wrote a story about how gender had infiltrated all of the departments, health, education, etc. And although we couldn't get the money we wanted to establish a Centre for Gender in the Parliament, I went round to all the institutions then, and Kigali Institute of Education had just lost a UK professor, and the director said, would you come in and we want you to do research? So that was my story in a very, very short way, Mary Jane, how I came to be a gender expert. And it was because I was always given the job of doing gender on these development studies, which were reforming technical and vocational education in Solomon Islands, reforming local government. In Fiji, I was reforming with a team that was reforming. Oh goodness, this is a problem that Maria and I have with our memories at the moment, either long COVID or anaesthetics. Fiji Customs and Enterprise, the taxation group managing exports. So all of these subjects were different, but all of them were gender. And of course, empowering women and men in understanding gender is something that happens in any kind of organisation. And I did have that fortunate experience.
No, thank you,
You've lived
Shirley.
an amazing
One
life,
thing
Shirley.
leads to another, and not the way you expected it, but it comes out really well.
That's right.
You're incredible, Shirley. I just wanted to also add to everyone that in the chat box, I've added in the links for the governor's launch speech at Government House. I'm introducing Shirley's book. Also the link from the e-press for UTS for the free version of the book, and also Shirley's launch speech at Government House. And hopefully that will give you an overview of all the work that's happened with the book. Thank you so much, Shirley. That was my addition.
Thank you so much, Maria, and also to Olivia, who represented you all at Government House.
It was wonderful. I felt very privileged to be there on behalf of all of us. Now, I think, Shirley, we're probably out of time for any more questions, but I do really thank you for being here today and for sharing your amazing life and the things you've done and inspiring us that we can all be agents of change in our own small ways in our own communities, because you've really demonstrated the ripple effect of empowering people to create the change that we all want to see. So thank you again for joining us, particularly after surgery. And as I said at the start, you look so glamorous. Nobody would ever know that you're recovering from recent surgery. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Olivia.
Back over to you, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Well said. If I could ask, only if it's convenient, for Nadine and Carolyn to turn on your cameras for a moment, we'll just take a quick group photo. This is our way of being able to share a bit about what we're doing in our club on social media and in our newsletters, which go out to the broader Zonta network.